Welcome to Pen and Perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional. Every silence holds a truth. Let's get into it. Walter did 2 years for something that never sat right. Too many people around him decided not to speak. So I decided the timeline would. Roscoe's wasn't just a restaurant. It was an LA staple. The one by LAX had been there long enough to feel like muscle memory. You didn't go because it surprised you. You went because it didn't. Same plates, same pacing, same low hum of people who already knew what they were ordering before the server finished saying hello. I sat in a corner booth with the window to my left. It was one of those mornings that felt undecided. I ordered without looking at the menu. The Obama, side of cheesy eggs, water with lemon. My notebook was on the table, closed. The pen rested on top of it, untouched. I scrolled, not hunting for anything, not researching, just letting the feed do what it always did, surface people living their lives in fragments. A group photo here, a repost there, someone smiling wide in a way that looked practiced. That was when my stomach tightened. A photo of Kiara and the group, and there he was. Walter? I'd told myself I'd already made peace with it. Apparently my body hadn't agreed. I set the phone down and looked out the window. Planes lifted off in the distance, steady and unbothered. Everything moving forward like it was supposed to. I'd been thinking about it since I talked to Kiara, telling myself it was just one of those cases that lingered because it brushed up against too many systems at once. Telling myself I didn't need to reopen it to understand that. But sitting there, food half eaten and my notebook still closed, I knew that wasn't true. There were stories you let go because you'd done your part. And then there were stories that didn't let you go. This was the second kind. I picked up my phone again, not scrolling this time. Opened my messages. Paused for a moment, thumb hovering, letting myself be sure. Then I typed, "Me, you free after work? I want to talk." No context, no preamble. If Kiara came, I'd explain it then. I locked my phone, slid it face down on the table, and finally opened the notebook. The first page was still blank, but the decision wasn't. Kiara came over after work, shoes off at the door like she'd been doing it long enough not to ask anymore. She dropped her bag on the chair, glanced around my living room, and said, "Okay, you look like somebody who already knows the answer but wants permission anyway." I laughed once, short, surprised. "Damn, you don't waste time." "Shitted. That's not why you texted me," she said, settling onto the couch. "You don't do come over texts unless something's bothering you." I sat across from her, legs tucked under myself, hands wrapped around a mug I'd reheated and forgotten about twice already. "I can't stop thinking about Walter." She didn't react right away. No eyebrow raise, no sigh, just a slow nod, like she'd been waiting for the sentence to finish forming. "Okay," she said. "Say more." "It's not guilt," I said quickly. "I already checked that. It's not savior shit either. I don't feel responsible for him." She smirked. "Good, because that would have been a problem." I smiled, then sobered. "It's structural. Something about the case never sat right with me. Not emotionally, logistically." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. The timing, the response, the way everything moved like it had already been decided before it was officially decided. She exhaled through her nose. "Yeah, I remember saying that part out loud and you going quiet." "I went quiet because I didn't want to chase a feeling," I said. "But it hasn't gone away." Silence settled between us. "So what you thinking?" she finally asked. "I think I need to look at it again," I said. "I don't trust stories that rely on silence to hold them together." She leaned back, crossed her arms. "And when you say, look at it again, you mean?" "Public records, logs, paper trails," I said. Stuff that already exists. I'm not calling sources yet. I'm not promising anything. I just want to see if what bothered me has a name. And if it does, then I decide what to do with it. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. That's fair. You know this won't be light work. I know. And if you find something, she added, it won't just belong to you anymore. I know that too. Another pause. Then she smiled, just a little. Okay, then don't do it alone. Something in my chest loosened at that. Not relief exactly. More like alignment. I wasn't planning to, I said. She stood, grabbed her bag. Text me when you start, even if it's nothing, especially if it's nothing. Why especially then? Because nothing is usually where the lie is hiding. After she left, the house felt quieter than before. Not empty, just focused. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen for a long second before touching anything. I wasn't chasing a story. I was checking my instincts. The first click came easy, too easy. I didn't start with Walter. That was rule number 1. You don't open a story by staring straight at the center of it. You start at the edges, the places people assume nobody's looking. I pulled up the public incident log first. Nothing fancy, no hacks, no favors, just the same records anybody with time and patience could access. Date, time, location, response units. Then I cross-checked it with the tow yard intake logs. That took longer. Those records weren't neatly digitized. Some scanned PDFs, some spreadsheets that looked like they'd been passed down from 3 different systems without ever being cleaned up. I worked quietly. No music, no TV, just the soft click of the trackpad and the hum of the refrigerator cycling on and off. At first, everything lined up, close enough anyway. Then I noticed it. The tow truck arrival time. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing, not because it was obviously wrong, but because it was early. Not impossibly early, not enough to raise alarms, just early enough to be curious. I checked the dispatch call time again, then the tow yard timestamp, then the call log showing when the request was officially placed. My fingers stilled. The truck was logged as arriving before the call was finalized. Not by hours, not by anything dramatic, by minutes. Most people would wave that off. System lag, clock differences, human error. Nobody went to jail over minutes. But I wasn't looking for crimes. I was looking for habits. I opened another case, same tow yard, same pattern. Not every time. Not enough to look deliberate unless you were paying attention, but often enough that my chest tightened in that familiar way. I wrote my first note of the day. Tow yard arrives before dispatch confirmation. Check frequency. Check dispatcher overlap. I didn't name it yet, didn't text Kiara, didn't let myself chase meaning. I just kept going. Another case, another log, another early arrival. Not every tow company, just one. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was worse. It was consistency. I reopened the screen slower this time and typed the dispatcher's name into the search bar. Just curiosity. At first, nothing surfaced that mattered. Then a smaller result appeared, buried, unrelated on paper, a community blurb, a volunteer mention, a quote pulled from a local panel I vaguely remembered scrolling past once and forgetting. I clicked it, and that's when it stopped being abstract. Because the dispatcher wasn't just a dispatcher, they were tied to a community organization, a familiar one, the kind people trusted without asking follow-up questions. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was a network, and I hadn't gone looking for it. I'd found it by accident. Update 1. I didn't close the laptop right away. I stayed where I was, hands resting flat on the desk, eyes unfocused. My brain needed a few extra seconds to catch up. This was the part nobody ever talked about. Not discovery in and of itself, but the moment after, that quiet recalibration. Once you notice a pattern, you don't get to pretend you didn't see it. You either respect it or you insult your own intelligence. I'd never been good at pretending. I decided to let the information settle. I washed my mug, wiped down the counter, did small, ordinary things on purpose, the kind of movements you use to keep yourself grounded when your mind wants to sprint ahead of your body. That night passed without ceremony. Sleep came, but it wasn't generous. I kept surfacing in fragments. Not dreams exactly, more like my brain replaying timestamps and names the way it does when it hasn't finished a thought yet. I didn't fight it. I let it run its course. The next few days blurred together in that familiar way life does when it refuses to pause. Work meetings, emails, errands, half-finished conversations that required just enough attention to keep me from drifting too far inward. I showed up to all of it, answered questions, met deadlines, laughed in the right places. Nobody asked if anything was wrong, which meant I was doing a good job of staying invisible. But underneath, my mind kept wondering, who else was connected to it? By the time I sat back down at my desk a couple mornings later, coffee cooling beside me, the pause was over. I opened a fresh document, dated it, and typed one line at the top. Start wide, stay clean, follow the paper. Then I went back to the screen and began again. I didn't jump from the dispatcher straight to conclusions. That would have been lazy, dangerous even. Instead, I built a perimeter. You don't collapse a structure from the center. You walk the edges first. You learn how it breathes. That meant pulling every public-facing document connected to the organization the dispatcher volunteered with. Press releases, grant announcements, community forums, panels, fundraisers, the kind of content designed to reassure, not invite scrutiny. It was clean, almost too clean. The same language appeared over and over across different years. Same phrases, same tone. Grassroots, restorative, community first. Everything read like it had passed through multiple hands trained to sand down anything sharp before it reached the public. Nothing overtly false, nothing you could circle and label a lie. That was the trick. People confuse transparency with truth, but I've learned that the cleanest narratives usually hide the messiest systems underneath. I clicked into the board listings next. Names, roles, rotations. I wasn't looking for scandal. I was looking for overlap. Who appeared together? Who disappeared at the same time? Who quietly stepped away after controversy and resurfaced somewhere else with a slightly altered title? That's when Taylor's name surfaced. She appeared the way people do when they're meant to feel incidental. A community organizer, a family-facing advocate, someone whose quotes were always soft, always empathetic, always just adjacent enough to power to be useful without being accountable. I remembered her. Everyone did, in that vague way people remember someone who always seems to be standing in the right photo at the right time. I pulled up her media mentions, interviews, guest appearances, a panel or two where she talked about holding space and bridging gaps. Nothing objectionable, nothing you could point to and call manipulation. But I wasn't reading for sound bites. I was reading for timing. Taylor's rise aligned neatly with a series of moments I already knew too well. Incidents that never quite became scandals, cases that stalled, stories that lost traction right before they should have tipped into something bigger. Not because of Taylor, because of proximity. She was there when statements needed softening, when communities needed reassurance, when narratives needed a human face that looked sincere enough to be believed. I reached out to people next. Quietly, carefully, everyone I could find who'd worked around her, under her, beside her. Some ignored me. Some entertained the conversation just long enough to protect themselves. A few said things that sounded helpful until you listened closely and realized they were saying nothing at all. But one conversation stayed with me. Maya. Not because of what she said, but because of what she refused to dress up. She didn't confirm anything, didn't deny it either. She spoke carefully, deliberately, like someone who understood the weight of words and chose not to waste them. There was integrity in her restraint. You could tell she knew more than she was offering, and that whatever she knew, she wasn't willing to make it messy just to be heard. That told me everything I needed to know. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This isn't an accident, I said quietly, to no one. I didn't write Taylor's name into the working draft yet. Instead, I opened a second document. This one wasn't a draft, it was a ledger. Names, dates, appearances, overlaps, and the longer I worked, the clearer it became. Taylor was a hinge, the kind of person systems use when they need movement without fingerprints. I closed the document and exhaled slowly. I hadn't found the story yet, but I was close enough now to feel its shape. That night, I stepped outside to take the trash out, phone still in my hand, mind half on what I'd been reading and half on the rest of the evening. The street looked the way it always did, quiet, ordinary, nothing trying to be memorable. That's when I noticed the car, parked across the street, dark, clean, unremarkable in every way except one. I'd seen it before, not here, somewhere else, outside a courthouse, down the block from a community meeting months back. Once, briefly, when I was still working first story and told myself I was just being paranoid. I tossed the bag, wiped my hands on my jeans, and went back inside. I locked the door, didn't rush to the window, didn't make it a thing. I poured myself a glass of water first, took a sip, let the normal sequence of my evening hold. Then I checked. The car was still there, not angled toward my place, not doing anything obvious, just parked like it belonged. A few minutes later, it was gone. I went back to my desk and opened the ledger again. Then I typed, because whatever that was meant to be, a reminder, a warning, a suggestion, it hadn't worked. It had only confirmed something I'd already started to understand. This wasn't new. I'd been visible longer than I realized, and now that I was paying attention, I wasn't going to stop. Update 2. I didn't stumble onto Dante. By the time his name showed up, I already knew what I was looking for. That's the thing about patterns. Once your brain locks onto them, they start feeling inevitable. I'd been following paper for days. Contracts, filings, quiet changes in ownership. The boring stuff people assume doesn't matter because it doesn't scream. Who gained access when Walter lost it? Who expanded when the ground supposedly collapsed? Who kept showing up in the margins of things that were never explained? Dante's business didn't explode overnight. That would have been sloppy. What it did was grow just enough, just fast enough, and always right after something else stalled out or got stuck in red tape. Permits approved quicker than usual. Zoning issues resolved without pushback. Contracts awarded where there should have been competition. At first glance, it looked like hustle. At second glance, it looked like luck. At third glance, it looked like timing that never missed. He never announced his wins, which didn't seem like him at all. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen longer than I needed to. I was disappointed in how clean it all was. This wasn't a man slipping through cracks. This was a man being carried. He didn't just avoid consequence. He'd profited. I pulled up the timeline again. Walter's case, the slowdown, the delays. I'd seen this before. Not this story. this shape. I remember thinking, okay, this is it. For a moment, I really did think I was finished. That's what scares me now, looking back. Because every time I've thought that, it's been right before something else opened up. I closed my laptop and stood up, trying to shake the heaviness out of my shoulders. I told myself I'd make tea, that I'd give my eyes a break, that I'd step away for a minute. Instead, my phone buzzed. A text I'd been half expecting and fully dreading. Still down to meet later? I stared at it longer than necessary. Yeah, I was, and I already knew this wasn't going to be a conversation about space or timing or ideas. This was about control. Hilltop was busy in that very curated way. I got there early on purpose. When he walked in, he smiled like this was a favor we were both doing for each other. Easy, familiar, the kind of smile that assumes cooperation before it's ever been offered. He hugged me lightly, asked how I'd been, commented on the weather, the usual soft landing before a harder conversation. We ordered coffee. Small talk stretched just long enough to be polite. Then he leaned back in his chair, fingers wrapped loosely around his mug, and said my name the way people do when they want you to listen without feeling accused. I've been hearing things. There it was. Not what are you working on? Not are you okay? Just hearing things. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip, let the silence sit where he put it. He kept going, filling the space himself. People are saying you're looking back into that case, the Walter situation. He said it gently, like concern, like community care, like he wasn't already watching my reaction too closely. I just wanted to check in, he added, because you know how this stuff goes. Optics matter, timing matters. Once something is out there, you can't put it back. There was no threat in his voice. That's what made it worse. He talked about community trust, about not wanting unnecessary fallout, about how stories don't just affect the people in them, but the people around them. All true statements, all carefully chosen. He never once said, "Don't publish." He didn't have to. I felt it anyway, low and immediate. That tightening right under my ribs that always tells me exactly when a line is being tested. I set my cup down and met his eyes. I hear you, I said, but I'm only doing my job. I don't have any predispositions or judgments about anyone or any organization. I'm just looking at the facts. I don't embellish. If there's nothing there, then there will be nothing to publish. That was it. No argument, no reassurance, no promise to be careful in the way he meant. Just the truth. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, calculation. Like he was adjusting expectations on the fly. Well, of course, he said after a beat, smiling again. I figured as much. We talked a little longer after that. Safer topics, logistics, nothing that mattered. The meeting ended the way these things always do when no one gets what they came for. Polite, professional, incomplete. We stood, hugged again. This time his grip lingered a second longer than necessary. Just take care of yourself. We'll talk soon, he said. I nodded. Always do. Outside, the air felt different, not heavier, sharper. I walked to my car and didn't look around right away. I knew. When I finally checked my mirrors, there it was. The same car. I didn't panic. I pulled out like normal and let it follow at a distance that was almost respectful. Almost. The timing settled it for me. The coffee wasn't a courtesy. It was a temperature check. And I just told them I wasn't cooling off. I'm going to stop it right there and let that sit. We'll get into the rest in part 2.